You've been away from home for 2 whole weeks. Not just at the office, not just on a quick vacation, but halfway across the world, working long hours on a business trip. You've been living out of suitcases, juggling time zones, missing home-cooked meals, and counting down the days until you can sleep in your own bed again. That was Marcus Williams's reality. Marcus wasn't just an average homeowner. He was a self-made entrepreneur who had built his career from scratch, the kind of man who worked hard for everything he had. His home in Atlanta was his pride and joy, a modern, spacious mansion tucked away in a quiet, gated community. The kind of place where the streets were lined with palm trees, lawns were perfectly trimmed, and the air smelled faintly of fresh flowers from the neighbors' gardens. The neighborhood also had something else, a strict homeowners association, or HOA. They prided themselves on keeping the community safe, which in theory meant enforcing rules about lawn height, paint colors, and neighborhood watch patrols. But as Marcus was about to learn, sometimes safety could be used as an excuse for something far more dangerous. It was a sunny afternoon when Marcus finally turned onto a street. He could already picture the moment, rolling up the driveway, walking inside, and being greeted by the familiar scent of home. He had his overnight bag slung over one shoulder and was dragging his suitcase behind him, his mind drifting to what takeout place he'd order from that night. But as soon as his house came into view, something fell off. First, the lights on the porch were on. That was strange. Marcus had made sure everything was turned off before he left. Then he saw the mailbox stuffed to the brim, almost bursting with envelopes and flyers. That made sense. 2 weeks worth of mail. But what didn't make sense was the silver SUV parked in the driveway. Marcus didn't own a silver SUV. At first, he thought maybe a delivery driver had pulled in to drop off a package. But then his stomach sank when he spotted someone standing at the front door. A woman, mid-50s, short blonde hair, holding a wine glass in one hand and staring right at him. And it wasn't a friendly stare. Marcus slowed the car, pulling into the driveway cautiously. The woman didn't move. Instead, she took a sip of wine and set the glass down on the patio table beside her, where 2 plates of snacks sat waiting as if she'd been enjoying an afternoon on his porch. When Marcus stepped out of the car, suitcase in hand, he expected her to say something like, "Oh, hi. Are you Marcus? I'm your neighbor. There's been a misunderstanding." But that's not what happened. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, "Can I help you?" in a tone that made it very clear she didn't think he belonged there. Marcus blinked, confused. I live here." The woman smirked. "No, you don't. The owner abandoned this place weeks ago. I'm on the HOA board, and they asked me to move in temporarily so it wouldn't sit empty." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He knew exactly what he was hearing. This woman was squatting in his house, and she was acting like she had every right to be there. And just when he thought it couldn't get any more surreal, she pulled out her phone and said the words that made his blood run cold. "I'm calling the police. You're trespassing." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. He'd just stepped out of his car, suitcase still in hand, and within seconds, this stranger, this wine-sipping self-appointed homeowner, was accusing him of trespassing on his own property. His voice stayed calm, but his words carried weight. "Ma'am, I think you're mistaken. I own this house. My name's Marcus Williams. I've lived here for years. I've got my ID, my house keys, and my mortgage documents inside my bag." The woman didn't budge. Her lips curled into the kind of smirk people give when they think they've already won. "Oh, really? That's interesting," she said. "Because I've been living here for 2 weeks. The HOA said it was abandoned, so I stepped in. They wanted to make sure no one trashed the place." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the absurdity. "Abandoned? I was on a business trip. My car's been at the airport. This is my home. Everything in there, from the furniture to the family photos, belongs to me." But instead of backing down, the woman, whose name he still didn't know, gave a sharp, dismissive laugh. "You expect me to believe you live here? Sorry, but I've been on the HOA board for years. I know everyone in this neighborhood. I've never seen you before." The way she said you wasn't just about not recognizing him. Marcus could feel the undertone. It wasn't about his absence. It was about who he was, how he looked, and the assumptions she'd made the second she saw him step out of his car. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, she held up her phone. "That's it. I'm calling the police. Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew how quickly things could spiral when someone weaponized a 911 call against a black man. Every headline, every tragic story he'd ever read about flashed through his mind. Ma'am, there's no need to do that. I can show you proof right now. But she had already turned away, speaking loudly into her phone as if performing for an audience. Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser. Yes, he's here now. He's a large black man. Looks dangerous. Please hurry. Marcus froze. She wasn't just accusing him. She was painting a picture for the dispatcher that could put him in serious danger. By now, his neighbors had started peeking out of their windows. A few even stepped outside, curiosity pulling them toward the unfolding drama. Marcus could see some familiar faces in the distance, but no one stepped forward yet. He decided to stay calm, to avoid any movement that could be misinterpreted. Slowly, he set his suitcase down on the driveway, keeping his hands visible. Look, he said evenly, you're making a mistake. If you just come inside, you'll see my family photos, my mail, No, she snapped. If you think you can just show up and intimidate me into letting you in, you've got another thing coming. The minutes felt like hours. Marcus could hear faint sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. His heart pounded in his chest. Not from guilt, but from the sheer absurdity and danger of the situation. Finally, 3 police cars pulled into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing. Doors opened, and uniformed officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts. The air in the neighborhood shifted, tense, watchful. The woman waved frantically, pointing at Marcus as if she'd just caught a criminal in the act. That's him, she shouted. That's the man trying to break into my house. Marcus glanced at the officers, then back at the woman. His voice stayed steady, but his eyes said everything. This is my home, and you're about to find out the truth. The flashing red and blue lights painted the quiet cul-de-sac like a scene from a crime drama. 3 black and white patrol cars lined up in front of Marcus's driveway, engines idling, radios crackling. The sound of the sirens faded, replaced by the steady hum of tension. Marcus stood perfectly still, suitcase at his feet, hands visible. Every movement felt deliberate now. He knew the weight of perception. One wrong gesture and the situation could spiral. The woman, wine glass now set aside, was in full performance mode. She waved her arms toward Marcus like she was pointing out a wild animal that had wandered into her backyard. Officers, over here. That's the man I told you about. He's trying to break into my house. One of the officers, a tall man with a firm expression, stepped forward. Sir, can we talk to you for a moment? His tone wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't exactly warm either. Marcus nodded slowly. Absolutely, officer. I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is my home. My name's Marcus Williams. I just got back from a 2-week business trip. I have ID, my house keys, and proof of ownership right here. Before the officer could respond, the woman jumped in. No, don't listen to him. I've been living here for 2 weeks. The HOA gave me permission after the previous owner abandoned it. He's lying. He doesn't live here. He's trespassing. Another officer joined the first, glancing between them. Ma'am, can you show us proof that you own this property? That question made her hesitate. She shifted uncomfortably, her confidence faltering for just a second. Well, I don't have papers, but the HOA told me. Ma'am, the officer interrupted, without proof of ownership or tenancy, we can't take your word over his. If he can show valid ID with this address, that's strong evidence he lives here. Marcus opened his wallet, pulling out his driver's license. The address on it matched the one printed on the mailbox right behind them. He also produced an envelope from his bag, one of his mortgage statements he'd grabbed from his travel folder before leaving the airport. The officers examined the documents, their posture easing slightly. One of them radioed back to dispatch to confirm the records, while the other asked Marcus a few more questions. How long have you lived here? Do you have a key to the property? Marcus held up his house keys, the ones that had been in his pocket since the day he bought the place. Yes, officer. And if you walk inside, you'll see my family photos, my clothes, my mail, everything that proves I live here. The officers turned back to the woman. Ma'am, it looks like he's the legal owner. Her face twisted in frustration. But the HOA? They said, "Ma'am," one officer said firmly, "the HOA can't give away someone's home. That's not how property law works. You're not on the title. You're not on a lease. You have no legal right to be here." By now, several neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, whispering to each other. A few nodded in Marcus's direction, clearly recognizing him. One even spoke up. "Yeah, that's Marcus. He's lived here for years. I don't know what she's talking about." The woman's confidence cracked completely. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her voice wavered. "This isn't fair. I was just trying to help the neighborhood." "Helping the neighborhood doesn't mean moving into someone else's home," one officer replied. "You need to gather your belongings and leave immediately. If you refuse, we'll have to remove you." Marcus stood silently, watching as she turned and stomped toward the front door. The officers followed, ensuring she didn't take anything that wasn't hers. The weight in Marcus's chest began to lift, just a little. But as the police escorted her out moments later, he knew this wasn't just about a misunderstanding. This was about someone seeing him and deciding, without evidence, that he didn't belong. As the woman, Karen, as Marcus would later learn, marched back into the house to collect her things, the tension in the neighborhood was thick enough to taste. The officers followed her inside, one staying close to make sure nothing accidentally found its way into her bags. Marcus stood in the driveway, trying to steady his breathing. He could feel dozens of eyes on him. Neighbors who had heard the sirens peeked out their windows and decided to wander outside for a better view. Some stood with arms folded, others whispered behind hands, and a few, to Marcus's relief, gave him small nods of recognition. A man from across the street stepped forward. "Marcus? Hey man, I didn't know you were back. I figured you were traveling again." His tone was casual, almost friendly, but it carried the weight of a witness. The officer near Marcus asked, "You know him?" "Yeah," the neighbor replied. "He's lived here for years. Runs his business from home sometimes. Good guy." That was the first crack in Karen's story. But more cracks were coming. From inside the house, one of the officers called out, "Sir, can you step in here for a moment?" Marcus walked toward the open door, where the officer gestured toward the living room. It was different. Karen had rearranged furniture, moved his photos into a box in the corner, and even replaced some of his artwork with generic canvas prints from a department store. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of mail, all addressed to Marcus Williams, alongside grocery bags with Karen's name on the receipts. The officer picked up the mail and handed it to Marcus. "Looks like these are yours." Before Marcus could answer, another voice chimed in from the doorway. It was an older woman from down the street. "Oh, I saw her moving in a couple weeks ago. She told me you had moved away and that she was house sitting for the HOA. I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to get involved." Another neighbor added, "Yeah, she even had a party in your backyard. Invited a few people over. Said she was settling in." Marcus stared at them, a mix of disbelief and anger rising in his chest. "A party? In my house?" The officer's jaw tightened. He turned to Karen, who was now dragging a suitcase down the hallway. "Ma'am, can you explain this?" Karen's voice was sharp. "I told you. The HOA said it was fine. I was just making sure the place didn't get vandalized." One of the officers shook his head. "The HOA can't authorize someone to live in a privately owned home without the owner's permission. And based on what we're seeing here, you took personal property, changed the locks, and misrepresented yourself to neighbors." Karen's tone shifted from confident to defensive. "I was doing the community a favor. You people act like I'm some kind of criminal." The officer replied bluntly, "Breaking and entering, changing locks, and taking over someone's home without consent is a crime." Silence fell for a moment. The neighbors looked on, some shaking their heads, others muttering to each other. The story Karen had built over the past 2 weeks was unraveling in real time, and everyone could see it. Marcus took in the scene, the boxed-up family photos, the rearranged furniture, the wine glass still sitting on his patio table outside. It was surreal, like stepping into a parallel version of his own life. When the officers finally told Karen she had 10 minutes to pack the rest of her things and leave, she muttered something under her breath about ungrateful people and how this used to be a nice neighborhood. But the truth was out now. The neighbors knew the real story. The police knew. And most importantly, Marcus knew exactly how close he had come to losing his home. Not to a burglar in the night, but to someone who believed she had the right to take it. By the time the last police car pulled away, the street was slowly returning to its usual quiet. But for Marcus, nothing about the evening felt normal. He stood in his driveway, suitcase still sitting where he'd dropped it hours earlier, looking at the house he had worked so hard to buy. It was his home again, but it didn't feel like it. The front door was unlocked now, and the officers had handed him the new keys they'd confiscated from Karen. Stepping inside felt strange, almost like walking into a place that was familiar and foreign at the same time. His family photos were still in the box, where Karen had hidden them. The sofa cushions were different. She had swapped them out for ones that match her taste. The pantry had groceries he didn't buy. In the fridge, expensive cheese and bottles of wine sat next to the containers of takeout he'd left before his trip. It was unsettling, like someone had tried to rewrite his life in 2 short weeks. Marcus wandered from room to room, taking it all in. Every small change she had made was like a reminder that someone else had been living his life, using his things, sleeping in his bed, hosting people in his backyard. Outside, a few neighbors lingered, clearly curious. One of them, the older woman who had seen Karen move in, approached cautiously. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner," she said quietly. "I thought the HOA really had given her permission. I didn't want to cause trouble." Marcus nodded. "I get it, but this could have gone very differently. She called the cops on me in my own driveway. That's not just a misunderstanding. That's dangerous." The woman looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "I know. I'm just glad you're okay." The HOA president stopped by later that evening after hearing what happened. He seemed more concerned about the bad press the incident might bring to the community than about the fact that one of his board members had taken over someone's home. But under pressure from both Marcus and the police report, the HOA voted to remove Karen from her position immediately. For Marcus, that was a small victory, but it didn't erase the bigger problem. This wasn't just about one woman crossing the line. It was about how quickly assumptions could turn into accusations, and how easily those accusations could escalate into something far more dangerous. He shared his story online a few days later, not for sympathy, but to warn others. His video walked viewers through everything that happened, from the moment he pulled into the driveway to the instant the police confirmed he was the rightful owner. He talked about the importance of keeping property records handy, of having security cameras, and of knowing your rights. The story went viral within days. Thousands of comments poured in, some shocked, some angry, many sharing similar experiences. People debated HOA's squatter laws and the role bias played in situations like his. Marcus read the comments with mixed feelings. On one hand, it felt good to know people were listening. On the other, it was frustrating that so many had been through the same thing. Back at home, he invested in a new security system. Cameras covering every angle of the property, a smart lock system he could control from anywhere, and motion sensor lights that made the entire front yard glow like a stadium. He wasn't going to be caught off guard again. Karen, meanwhile, faced legal trouble for trespassing and unauthorized occupancy. Word spread quickly that she had moved out of the neighborhood entirely. Weeks later, life finally began to settle back into its normal rhythm. Marcus would pull into his driveway after work, unlock the door, and step inside without seeing someone else's wine glass on his patio table. But there was one thing he couldn't shake, the thought that in just 2 weeks, someone had tried to erase his place in his own home. And that's the lesson he left his viewers with in his final video on the incident. Sometimes, the real danger isn't a stranger breaking in at night. It's someone who looks you in the eye in broad daylight and decides your home, and your life should be theirs.